A warning before our next segment, some of the images we're going to show are disturbing, including those coming out of Bucha, of mass graves, people bound and shot at close range, signs of mutilation and torture, and descriptions like these from Ukrainian President Zelensky before the UN Security Council today.
Some of them were shot on the streets, others were thrown into the wells, so they died there in suffering. They cut off limbs, cut their throats, slashed their throats. Women were raped and killed in front of their children.
They're descriptions and images that have certainly caught the attention of the media, with headlines like "Images of Dead Civilians in Ukraine Shake the World" and "Up-Close Ukraine Atrocity Photographs Touch a Global Nerve." And the brutality on display has led to intense concern about the fate of those refugees, with the U.S. committing last month to accepting as many as 100,000 people fleeing Ukraine. But what about the many other refugees fleeing violence around the world from places like Syria, Haiti, Central America, which get comparatively less media attention and less consideration by Americans and our leaders? Joining me are Adam Isacson, he's Director of Defense Oversight for WLA, which advocates for human rights in the Americas, and Daniel Pereira, Communications Director for the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. Daniel, Adam, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Can I get a brief reaction from both of you, Adam, for starts? What's your reaction to President Biden's decision to welcome 100,000 Ukrainian refugees?
Oh, I think it's the smart decision. You're saving lives. People, if you're a refugee, it actually means you can apply and start the process outside the United States, have your background hopefully quickly checked, and then be able to come to the United States without having to try to do some transatlantic voyage or make your way across Mexico. That is the right way to do it, and I do think it should apply to other countries right now.
Daniel, disagree with any of that? You're nodding your head, apparently in agreement.
Oh, yeah, I think that's 100% correct. I think that honestly, the way the Biden administration has reacted to the war in Ukraine and to the refugee crisis that's developing there is, in many ways a model for what we should want to see for conflicts and situations around the world.
Adam, I know you just got back from the border of Texas and Mexico sometime in early March, and I don't think anybody can dispute that not all immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers are created equal in the eyes of our leaders in this country. Based on your firsthand experience, what accounts for the disparate treatment?
We should just be clear here that, U.S. law says that anybody who can set foot on U.S. soil has the right to apply for asylum. That's different than refugee status. You can say, I'm afraid to go back to my country. That doesn't apply to everybody, clearly. It has especially not applied since March of 2020, when a pandemic order called Title 42 said that, because of the pandemic, nobody can ask for asylum. We're going to expel you immediately. Where did they get expelled? Places like where I just was, Tamaulipas, Mexico, which has a state of Mexico, which is the only border state that has a level 4 travel warning from the State Department saying, do not go here. There's kidnapping, there's violence all the time. Yet we are sending tens of thousands of people back into Tamaulipas every day, even if they are trying to ask for protection. Almost none of the people in that part of the border are Ukrainian. Almost all of them are from somewhere in Latin America and the Caribbean. Latin America has 8% of the world's population and more than a third of the world's homicides. A lot of these people probably do have very valid asylum claims that deserve their day in court or due process in the United States. But for more than 2 years now, it's been almost impossible to be heard by a U.S. official when you say you fear for your life.
Well, Adam, staying with you for a second, I think everybody watching remembers the comments that were reported by NBC and others that President Trump, who enacted or at least used Title 42, which Joe Biden has said will expire at the sometime, I believe, later in May. The infamous comment from President Trump about why do we have all these people from shithole nations? Why don't we have more people coming from Norway? It's hard to escape the notion that that's about the color of the skin of the people who are hoping to enter this country. Is that unfair?
Absolutely. No, it's fair. It's one of a few reasons, but it's fair. I would say there's 3 reasons.
What are they?
right now, Ukrainians are walking right past other nationalities. The first is absolutely racism. You know, darker skinned people, you know, Ukrainians are fair skinned people that look like the dominant ethnicity in the United States. Second is obviously the beginning of this story showed the urgency in the news of, you know, dead bodies on TV in Ukraine. And the third reason, you know, asylum in the United States comes from 1980, the height of the Cold War. And it's in the chip in our brain is that those most deserving of asylum are people fleeing from communism or state oppression. And somebody fleeing, for instance, a gang in Honduras may be in just as much danger, but they don't seem to meet the definition with the same urgency. So those three things mixed together, I think you have to give them all some causal weight.
But you know, Daniel, it seems, while I'm not in the business that you both are in, there was a comparable urgency for tens of thousands of Haitians. And we all remember the images there, whether they were literally being whipped by people agents on horses or just rounded up by agents with whips on horses. There was an urgency there. That wasn't viewed the same way the urgency for Ukrainians is viewed.
No, it wasn't, and I think part of it is the role that, you know, a number of different groups have played. You know, the media has played, that the government has played, the previous administration certainly, in dehumanizing the people fleeing, catastrophes or political strife in Haiti and Central America and the Caribbean and Africa. The racism is part of it, the dehumanization, sort of, you know, the generic impression of, you know, the refugee or the asylum seeker as this person of color, and you know, we don't really think of them as people at a certain point, or we should, but you know, they're not treated that way in their perception. I think another thing that's important to remember is that dealing with refugee and asylum seekers from these countries often involves reckoning with the United States government's own role in creating the situations that they're fleeing from. You know, I mean, the United States is, you know, the global superpower, but especially with our policy decisions in Central America, in the Caribbean and Haiti, you know, I think that by looking at why people are fleeing, we have to think about, you know, what did the United States do and how did U.S. involvement create the conditions that people are now trying to flee from?
Well, politics also occasionally, I'm not a historian of refugees, but also will occasionally trump race in the case of people coming from Cuba, because that satisfied our political interests. Obviously, we were willing to overlook the fact that the color of their skin was not like ours. You know, Adam, Daniel just mentioned the media, and I don't think the media could have possibly done a better job on the situation in Ukraine than it's done. But the contrast that comes away to me as someone who is in the media is the job that we haven't done with a lot of the populations that you're talking about. And it seems to me if the same attention by the media was paid to people coming from Central America or those Haitian refugees, not for a handful of days, but beyond, and tracked what happened to them when, 10,000 were deported over a period of a month or so, we might have a different reception on the part of the American people and the government. Is that a fair analysis?
That is a more than fair analysis. There was some very good media coverage of those few days in Del Rio, Texas, when Border Patrol people were charging at the Haitians, but there was very little coverage of what happened on the tarmac in Port-au-Prince when 20,000 people were later sort of dumped in very dangerous conditions. Only a few very intrepid reporters have actually gone there. Now, there are some amazingly good reporters working on immigration, working on asylum, and they are some of the most frustrated people as well, because they can really report the heck out of a story, putting a human face on it, and it barely lasts more than a news cycle. 3 days later, it disappears. And an interesting counterexample that I think we all need to look at was the family separations of 2018. Some very gripping photos, some smuggled out audios of crying children, and the whole country stood at attention for a few days because of that very good media coverage. I find, though, that when it doesn't happen on U.S. soil, or when it happens in the middle of the desert, like the 800 or more people that died on U.S. soil in the last year, it's very hard to get attention, despite some very good reporters' very good work.
Yeah, one last thing for the two of you, if I can. We mentioned Title 42, and I maybe should have explained it better. A public health measure that allows the traditional rules of asylum to be suspended, at least temporarily. So in the case of people coming across the border from the day that This was started by Donald Trump and, in all fairness, continued by Joe Biden until he made the announcement the other day. People, instead of awaiting their asylum hearing here, ended up in some of the most dangerous parts of Mexico. The good news is that's about to disappear. So I assume more fairness, Daniel, will be invoked. The bad news is, it seems to me, that we are likely to have a rush at our borders that will further inflame the anti-immigration part of our country, both politicians and citizenry, that could make things even worse. What's your analysis, that quickly, if you can, Daniel, of what the end of Title 42's use is going to mean?
Yeah, so I think that first off, it's wonderful that Title 42 is ending. I think that we hope that it ends sooner, that, they're ending it in May, but I think that it could absolutely be taken care of sooner and done away with. I think that one of the things that we're seeing here is the legacy of the gutting of the systems, the structures, the bureaucracies that manage refugees and asylum, applications on the border and across the country. We're dealing and will be dealing with the gutting of those institutions for a long time. The Trump administration did tremendous damage to them, underfunded them, reoriented them in a much more punitive and a much less effective and humanitarian way. And so, I think that it's vital that we staff those agencies, that we provide the resources that we need, and make sure that they are pursuing those missions effectively.
Adam, I only have 30 or 40 seconds. It's cause for celebration, but I assume for much worry as well.
Yeah, it's cause for worry because, if you have 200,000 people coming to the border right now asking for protection, you could have 300,000 or more for at least the first few months after Title 42. Now, if we did what Daniel had talked about, it would be undramatic. People would just line up and it would be non-chaotic. It would be people just, filling out forms and then having their hearing dates scheduled. No problem, right? But that's just not in place. So the danger is we're going to see scenes of chaos, people crowded into tents, under bridges, and Republicans just making hay of it all the way up to November.
Hope that isn't the case. Adam Isacson, Daniel Pereira, I really appreciate your time, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.